Hello, welcome to Z Marie Design. Let's upcycle denim jeans into a chic bag. Using added embellishments makes it even more unique. So I'm going to start with the upper portion of my denim that I have left over from a previous project. And I will begin by detaching the loops from all around my jeans with my seam ripper just to reduce the bulk when I add my lining. I'm going to seam rip the front part of the crotch to reduce the bulk and to create a new seam area there so that the denim can lie flat. So I will move that part of the crotch over, pin it in place, take it to my sewing machine, and just top stitch along that area. Next, that the crotch area has been sewn, I'm going to trim that part of the seam allowance to a 1/2 inch. And I won't worry about the back because we will trim that down in just a minute. I'm going to match my waistband areas. That will become the opening of my purse. And then I will press out my denim, creating a different side seam at this point, making sure everything lies flat. I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to create a straight edge along the bottom, just lining it up with the shortest part of the denim. And I will mark it with my chalk. And just cut a straight edge with my scissors. Next, I will measure my denim. I will measure the width and measure the height just so I can prepare my lining. And you will need 2 pieces for your lining. Now for your lining, you can use a single piece of fabric. I did a patchwork for my lining using 6.5 inch squares. I just sewed my squares together, pressed my seams open. And then I'm going to put these 2 pieces of lining fabric together. And with my denim, I will lay it on the top of my lining fabric and I will use this as my pattern piece. I have pinned my waistband area together and I'm matching up that straight edge on the bottom with the straight edge on the lining. And then I'll cut a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance on both sides of my denim. And I'm doing this to both of my lining pieces. And I'm just eyeballing this. Now for the top part of the denim, I'm just going to mark it out with a piece of chalk. And then I will come back and I'm going to do a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And I'm just going to eyeball that 1/2 inch seam allowance and mark that off with my chalk. And that becomes my cutting line. That gives me enough seam allowance and enough when I fold over for top stitching. So next I will prepare my lining pieces for my magnetic snaps and for my pockets. For my pockets, I'm upcycling the back parts of the denim pockets. So I fold it in half and mark my center. And I do this on both of my lining pieces. Then I'm going to measure down 1.5 inches down that center. That will be where I place my magnetic snap. I also measure down 3 inches. That's where I will place my pocket. And I'll do that on both of my lining pieces. Your magnetic snap comes in a set of 4. And then you also need 2 pieces for interfacing. So the washer of the magnetic snap is your pattern. There are 2 little openings that you will mark on that center, 1.5 inches down. And then you will cut 2 slits on those openings. That's where the prongs for the magnetic snap will go. And I'll leave a link in the description so that you can see a close-up of how to insert these magnetic snaps. You will also use that washer to mark those openings on your interfacing. I'm just using a piece of upcycled batting for my interfacing, and again I am making the snips on those 2 markings. You will take 1 piece of your magnetic snap that has the prongs, insert the prongs into those 2 slits that you just cut open, put your interfacing or your batting over the prongs, and then you will take a piece of the washer, one of the washers, and put that over the prongs. And after you put the washer over the prongs, I just usually take the end of my scissor handle and I just press each of those prongs to the side. And it looks like that when you put them in. So you'll do one part of the magnetic snap on one part of the lining and the other magnetic snap on the other lining. And again, I measure that down 1.5 inches. Now it's time to put on your pockets, and again I'm upcycling the back part of the denim pocket that I just unpicked with my seam ripper, and I just follow the seam that's already on the pocket and attach a pocket on both linings. And then with right sides facing, you can now sew your lining pieces together. Match up my magnetic snaps, matching up my side seams and my bottom seam. You're going to sew down your side seam, your bottom seam, and back up your side seam. But on your bottom seam, leave about 4 to 5 inch opening for turning, and just making sure to backstitch at the beginning and at the end of each of those seams. So now that your lining is sewn together, we're going to press those seams open. That's your opening that you left for turning. So I always press my seams open, just makes it easier for boxing the corners, and it makes it easier to see that seam allowance for the turning, for that opening. So next, to box that corner, you will match up the side seam with the bottom seam, and I usually just put a pin through that side seam and bring it through the bottom seam, and then pin that in place. And I'm marking 3 inches across, and I'm going to make a mark, and that will be your sew line, and that's how you will box your corner, and you'll do that on both sides. So both sides of my lining are sewn for the box corner. You will trim that within a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and I'm just trimming it with my pinking shears because it makes it easier to turn that corner out. So I'm turning my bag right side, my lining part of the bag right side out, and I'm pushing those box corners out. And so now the lining of your bag is all ready and you have your opening there for turning. So you can just set this to the side for right now. We'll move on to the main part of the bag. So I have my denim part of the bag ready, and I'm going to gather quite a bit of embellishments for this. Lots of laces and trims. I have some tassels and some beads and buttons. I also created this rope tassel out of embroidery floss that I put onto an upcycled keychain, and I just put that on with a piece of ribbon. I also have a piece of a pin, an upcycled pin that I just tacked down with some embroidery floss. I attached these ladybug buttons that I found in my stash and some heart buttons. And I also made sure to layer quite a bit of my ribbon and my rickrack and laces onto the front of my bag, and I just sewed those down with coordinating thread. I had some blue lace. I layered my rickrack onto some of my ribbon. I'm also upcycling some earrings, some broken earrings that I had. I found this lock. It's a pin, and I pinned that on, and I'm upcycling a keychain, and I had some other pieces of keychains that I put on there. For that rope tassel, I just tied that on with a piece of ribbon, and then I sewed down at the top. I sewed down those belt loops that I initially unpicked, and that just helps to reduce the bulk. And so once I have everything all sewn down, this is what it looks like. And I coordinated all of my embellishments with the colors of my lining fabric. So my lining fabric had yellows and blues and reds in them. So that's what I coordinated it with. And if you want to know how to make those rope tassels, just leave me a message in the link below. So now on to creating our handles. My handles measures 5 inches wide by 24 inches long, and I make those from the bottoms of another pair of jeans that I have. And if I have just some remnants, I just stitch those together and press the seams open. And then I cut out my pattern. So I'm going to fold the raw edges, and I'm going to press that seam, and I fold the raw edges in toward that center, fold the other part of the raw edge in toward the center, and I press again all the way down the handle, and then fold it in again. So now all of your raw edges are in the inside, and then take it to your machine and you stitch on both sides of your handle. Now when I top stitch my handles, I usually increase my stitch length to 3.0 or 3.5. So you can set the handles to the side for now. All of our embellishments are sewn on. You see I still have the pockets, the original pockets on the back of the jeans. Now I'm going to sew that bottom part of the denim purse together. I'm going to turn it wrong sides out, matching that center crotch seam up. And make sure to match up the parts of your waistband. That way you can see where your new side seams are. Match up that bottom seam, and I am clipping those in place to take it to the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance on that bottom seam. So now that my 1/2 inch seam allowance is sewn, I'm going to trim off all of the extra bits that I had at the bottom of my trims and embellishments, and I'll move on to marking my side seams so I can prepare to box those corners. Because I have new side seams now, I mark those with my chalk on both sides. And then I'm going to match that side seam with the bottom seam. And I'm just going to put a pin in that side seam where I've marked it, and I'll bring that pin up through the bottom seam that I've sewn. And then I can pin all of that in place, just like you did on the lining. And I'm going to lie it down on my mat, and I'm going to again mark 3 inches across using my marking tool. This is my stitch line, and I'll take that to my sewing machine and I will stitch across that 3-inch mark on both sides of my denim part. Now that my boxed corner is all stitched, I'm going to clip that to a 1/2-inch seam allowance on both sides, and then I turn my bag right side out. Now I'm going to attach my handles, so I'm going to measure across, and then I will take half of that measurement, and then I will take half of that measurement, and then I will mark it in the center, and where it's quartered, that's where I'm going to mark at. So my center is 10 inches because the total length of my bag is 20. And so where I'm going to put the mark for my handle is at 5 inches. And I'm going to put the handles on the inside of the bag, clip it in place, and then I will make sure that my handles are straight before I take it to the sewing machine and tack it down. So I'm just making sure that my handles aren't crooked before I tack down those handles. And again, I sewed it on the inside. The handles are on the inside of the denim. Now initially I was going to take my lining and I was going to do to turn it, but I decided against this. Since I have a 1/2-inch seam allowance, I'm just going to fold it over. So I went back to the sewing machine and I sewed up the bottom part of the bag. And so I'm going to press a 1/2-inch seam allowance on the top of my lining, and then I put my lining inside my bag with wrong sides facing. So the right side of the lining you can see it there, and then I pin it in place. And I'm going to stitch from the inside about a 1/2-inch seam allowance from the edge. And I unbuttoned there because there would have been quite a bit of bulk to try to sew over both of those pieces of the fly. So I just sewed over one part of the fly. And then this is what it looks like when it's all done. And it makes it even more unique. I kept the back parts of the pocket, and I even kept the tag that came on there. And you can see the inside of the lining where I still have the patch pocket there from the original part of the jeans, and it just makes it so unique doing it as a patchwork design. And feel free to do these embellishments. Just add whatever you like to add. It makes it just so much more unique. So I just took all of the red and yellows embellishments. And I hope you like this project, and I hope you'll give it a try. Thanks for watching.